Aloha, and thanks for listening to the Hawaii Hypnosis Podcast, promoting quality hypnosis and NLP education on the islands of Hawaii, where I interview the top hypnotists, hypnotherapists, and NLP practitioners in the world so that you can learn their secrets to create positive changes in your life and the lives of others. You can subscribe to the Hawaii Hypnosis newsletter at www.hawaiihypnosis.org. You will receive subscriber-only content such as free contests, articles to help you learn hypnosis and NLP, updates on upcoming hypnosis/NLP trainings in Hawaii, plus an exclusive hypnosis audio that is only available to the newsletter subscribers. Thanks for listening. Aloha, folks. Today my guest is Phil Farber from Meta-Magick.com. That's Meta, M-E-T-A hyphen Magic, M-A-G-I-C-K.com. Phil is a master NLP practitioner and trainer, hypnotherapist, a modern-day mystic, and an author on various topics. Phil, thanks for taking the time to allow me to interview today. Now, could you take a little bit of time and let my audience know more about you and your rather large body of work?
Okay. Thanks for having me on the show. And let's see. I've been involved in hypnosis for a considerable part of my life, kind of a generational thing. My father actually was a physicist, worked his way through college with a stage magic and stage hypnosis show, and he had lots of books on the shelves when I was a kid. And so I started that when I was real young. I was probably about 10 years old, and practicing hypnosis on my friends and things like that. And in later years, I just kept pursuing that, and that was all like really old kind of classic hypnosis, pre-Erickson, pre-Ellman, and kind of very directive sort of stuff. And I enjoyed doing it. Some of that was very cool. When I did get involved in the more modern stuff, as I came in contact with that, that just added to it. I actually really got much more into the Ericksonian kind of hypnosis and into NLP. And around the same time I was getting into NLP, I guess we're talking early 80s, I was also getting involved in studying ceremonial magic, the Western esoteric tradition. And the two seemed very... the two fields seem very compatible to me, even though when I mentioned this to either NLP people or the magic people, everything said, no, you can't do that. You can't combine those things. So anyway, I really started working, combining elements of hypnosis and NLP and magic and meditation and yoga and so on, and finding some very interesting things. And my first book on the subject was published in 1995. That was called Future Ritual, which has been out of print for some years, but if you look around, you can still find copies on Amazon or eBay. And let's see, the more recent magic book is called Meta-Magick, the Book of Atem, which came out in 2008. And there's yet another one called Brain Magic, which will be out in 2011. Plus, I also write fiction, so there's some novels in there as well if you look on Amazon, which also have a lot of interesting bits of hypnosis and magic and so on in there. Plus, I've written a lot of articles for a lot of different publications, Journal of Hypnotism, Hypnosis Today, the Journal of Experiential Trance, and many others.
You have your two different types of hypnosis. You have your more directive type and your more indirect. Do you see either forms of hypnosis being the direct kind or the indirect kind fitting more with magic work?
Well, it depends what you're doing. I mean, the more directive kind, if you're working with another person, just in a basic hypnosis session, for instance, if you're working with another person, you actually really need a little bit of both. You need to get somebody, first of all, to actually just follow directions. The simple kind of stuff of please sit in the chair and so on. And there's very indirect ways you can do that, but there's also at least enough directive stuff where just the basics of, place your hands on your thighs and put your feet on the floor kind of thing, or take a deep breath. There's always some direct suggestions in there. So in magic, if you're working the same way, if you're working with another person, there's some aspect where following directions is an important piece of the work. getting somebody else to understand what you're doing or to repeat your experiment or something like that. You need to be able to explain it in a way that suggests to them how to proceed. Being very indirect about that is not always quite the best way. However, when you're actually doing the work, the more indirect methods sometimes are very, very compatible, because you really want to stimulate the brain, stimulate the mind to go off into different kinds of processes rather than necessarily do a specific thing, right? And what I'm finding increasingly, in fact, in magic is that it's actually the idea of transderivational search. In Ericksonian hypnosis and NLP, we have the idea that when you're confronted with something vague, even finding the meaning of a word, your mind sorts through a list of possibilities and selects one. In a sense, getting magical outcomes hinges very much on that process. And that's more of an Ericksonian thing. That's really what you're doing in Ericksonian hypnosis, is being artfully vague in a way that gets people's minds to go off into these processes and to sort through things and to find experiences, to go internal. And so in a magical context, that's often a very useful thing. So on the surface level, yeah, you want people to be able to follow instructions and to be able to do things the way that you've suggested, just so that you can repeat an experiment or repeat a ritual the way it's been done. But once you're in that, you want the mind to be able to go off on these searches and experiences and internal experiences.
In a second, I'm going to ask you about Meta-Magick and how it came to be. Now, I was watching a YouTube clip a while back when you were explaining the different systems that you took, I guess, philosophies from and some of the methodology. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've heard of Huna at one point.
Absolutely, sure.
Now, one thing that I've found out, like, I always kind of seemed really skeptical about Huna, especially being it being traditional Hawaiian mysticism and whatnot. And there's a bunch of you can call them Kanaka Maoli. Kanaka Maoli means Native Hawaiians, and a lot of Native Hawaiians have really no respect for Huna, knowing that I believe it was Max Freedom Long, and I think it was 1936, basically came to the islands and used the word kahuna, basically took it from kahuna and used Huna to describe his own metaphysics. What do you think about trying to piggyback off the system and creating something new without creating your own thing?
Well, let's see. I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I do understand the difference. When I was in Hawaii some years ago, I was interested. I've read Max Freedom Long's books, and I've actually taken some classes on that style of Huna. However, when I was in Hawaii, and I started talking to some of the people there and the traditional folks, and very quickly understood that I knew even before then from Long's books that this was something that he had kind of created, and a lot of the words that he uses are different than the traditional uses and so on. I do think that might have, he was sort of using it, the idea that it was a traditional practice or that he's recreating some traditional practice, as a marketing tool. It's something that's going to attract people by saying it's a traditional practice. You see the same thing, and I'm going to get a little flack for this, with some of the neo-pagan traditions like Wicca and so on, which is really a modern revival of an ancient thing, and it was recreated more in the 20th century by people like Gerald Gardner and Alex Sanders and so on, who kind of built their own system with whatever little tiny bits they knew of the older system. So it's more properly called neo-pagan rather than pagan, because it's a modern tradition. It's something that's been created recently. However, it does kind of bargain on having the older name or the idea of the older tradition attached to it, in that it gives it a more mystical aura, I guess, and people will be more apt to go in and study it. Likewise, in terms of magic, most people pick up on the magic spelling with a K from Aleister Crowley, who kind of revived that spelling. That was an archaic spelling from like the Middle Ages, and he created his own system from bits and pieces that he had, particularly from the Golden Dawn, which again was claimed to be a Rosicrucian tradition, but had really reinvented everything in the 19th century. So there is there's a tradition all in itself of borrowing old, names of different traditions to base your stuff on and do it. I try to avoid that as much as possible. I do have Meta-Magick in the name, although actually if you read the book Meta-Magick, I actually use the word magic, I think maybe once in the whole book.
Yeah, I've definitely. I'm sorry, you're going to say you use Atem a lot more in the book.
Yeah, right. It's about the entity Atem. It's about how our brains work. It's about the mirror neuron system in the brain, and I do talk about NLP, about neuro-linguistic programming, a lot more. That's actually a good example. NLP was something that they created a fairly new name, a new name for a new system, and that worked just fine, and they were still able to market it. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have any problem with it. What I've studied of it and what the courses that I took in it, it worked. The stuff, it does its thing. Although Long was probably basing it more on what he knew of Western psychology and things like theosophy and Western esoteric traditions rather than the Hawaiian. I don't have too much trouble with these traditions, although I could see how people who were raised in the real tradition would want to separate that, would want to make a distinction.
What exactly is Meta-Magick, and how did it come to be?
Well, Meta-Magick is essentially, the word meta, the Greek prefix means about or beyond. Okay, it's really magic about magic. I wanted to use the techniques of magic itself to be able to learn about magic. I mean, in traditional magic, you get a set of rituals, you get a bunch of practices, and you learn them, and for the most part, a lot of that stuff works, and it's very interesting and whatever. But we're not really given the tools to understand how it works, and we live in a different age now than when a lot of that stuff was written. Even the material that comes from the early 20th century, we have things like NLP. We have understanding of neurology and neuroscience, and we can actually look at this stuff and kind of turn it back on itself and use it to understand what processes, what's actually going on when we're doing these practices, when we're doing these things. That allows us to make them more effective, to get different kinds of results. I'm going to take this back just a little step for the listeners who might be going, magic? What the hell is that? Essentially, magic is variously called the yoga of the West, or the Western esoteric tradition, or so on. It's a way of understanding and changing your own consciousness. It's about understanding the relationship between your consciousness and the world. Now, in movies and so on, you get this idea of magic as this kind of fantasy thing where people shoot fireballs out of their fingertips and levitate things and so on, and those are metaphors for the processes that happen. Really, magic it's about how we change ourselves, how we change our own consciousness. And so as such, it's very compatible with things like hypnosis and NLP. And we can also use those, hypnosis and NLP and neuroscience and memetics and other modern ideas to understand the techniques of magic. How do they change our consciousness? That's really what Meta-Magick is. It's an attempt to, or a set of practices that help us to understand how magic is working, which enables you to create your own rituals, your own techniques, and so on.
That's definitely a really good explanation. So I know that anytime I've talked about magic, a lot of people look at it being real occultish and work of the devil and whatnot. Even when I was reading about sigil work, sigil, I'm not sure how it's really pronounced. I can't remember who said it correctly. I think it might have been I think it was Austin Spare, was talking about is basically just a psychological intent.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, there is